Two guys at work that are unsaved are gossiping about each other. Two guys at work are saved are gossiping about each other. Same kind of imposition, if you want to put it that way, or imposing, if you please. So we got to realize the subject is relevant. And secondly, we got to realize this, that conflicts and potential conflicts have got to be realized or understood by the believer. Now, I want to give you two basic realizations of development here. Realization comes from development, by the way, in both cases, of a biblical perspective or view of conflicts. So God becomes our director, or God's Word rather becomes our directory. It becomes our dictionary. It becomes our diagram. It's how we operate. So when we look at conflicts, we look at them through the perspective that God has given us in His Word. I really don't care what your mother-in-law thinks about this, or your father-in-law thinks, or your dad, or your mom. I really don't, other than the fact that if they need some help, we can try to help them with this to get God's perspective of what conflicts are all about, so they can realize from God's perspective the accomplishments that God is going to have take place, consequential of you being solution-oriented and working through these kind of conflicts. Now, how many of you got unresolved conflicts at the house? How many of you got unresolved conflicts at home? Well, why? Or on the job. Why are they unresolved? I mean, you're a believer, you said. Now we can't blame unresolved conflicts on our sinful nature any longer. Why? Because you said you were saved. Now, that doesn't mean potentially that's not there. But we've got to move and look at this through God's perspective rather than the fallen race, etc., etc. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Unresolved conflicts in a believer's life will never be justifiable. It won't be justifiable. I'll show you that before we get finished. Especially if it involves others. Unless the other doesn't want to resolve the thing, and you can only be a peacemaker as much as lies within you the possibility, okay? And we'll talk about that as well, so hang with me on this. So we got to realize this, that God's Word is our dictionary, it's our directory, it's our diagram for describing all conflicts. And secondly, the realization comes from a determinate categorization of conflicts. Not all conflicts end up in the same barrel. You know what I mean by that? If you went to a pickle barrel back in the old days, what would you expect to pull out of the barrel but a pickle? Okay? That's it. Well, these conflicts that we're talking about are not all in the same barrel. There are three separate barrels. And each barrel, if you please, is labeled or by category. And I want to give, and this is from an author that I think much of, but I'll share these with you anyway. So there's conflicts due, and some of them are not because of sinful issues. For instance, the first one. We have conflicts because we're different. We're all different. You know what I'm saying? We're different people. We're different individuals. We express individualities, personalities, giftednesses, talents, skills, lack of talents, etc. Abilities, inabilities, etc. So these are non-sinful issues. We have little habits that just drive people crazy. You know, little things that just drive people up a wall. You know, flinches, mannerisms, etc. You chomp your food too loud at the table. You know, you have bad habits and so forth and so on. These are not necessarily sinful. I know what you're thinking, Bill, stop it. That's not true. I don't know what he's thinking, but I know him, and it's not good. Well, we have all these things that we're different about, and if we're not careful, we'll take something that's a non-sinful thing that's conflicting with our temperaments, and we'll make it or create it into a sinful situation whereby we will sin, we'll offend, we'll say something we shouldn't say, do something we shouldn't do, etc., etc. Because we're just different people. We have different likes, we have different dislikes. We have different tastes of music, of literature, etc., etc. Some music that you would listen to, maybe I wouldn't choose to listen to, and I would choose not to. That's my choice. I'm not going to cause a stink over the fact that I don't particularly care for this kind of music. Now, there's some music I abhor, and I'd let you know real quick, that stuff stinks. You know, it's immoral, it's wicked. But we're not talking about sinful stuff here. We're talking about things that are not sinful that we disagree on, that we don't all like, we don't all rejoice in, we don't all say, oh boy, we get to do this, we get to do that. That's not your cup of tea. Well, okay. So sometimes there's conflicts like that. Then there's conflicts that are due to sinfulness. This is the second barrel. These are absolutely sinful. that cause conflicts. They cause conflicts with God. Sin does. It causes conflicts with believers who are trying to walk with God. And your relationship with them is conflicting because they're not going to fellowship in that arena with you if they're walking with God. So there's going to be a conflict. You think I'm better, you're better than I am, oh, Mr. Spiritual and all that stuff. Well, no, I don't think I'm better than you, if that would be the case. I just choose not to sin because I love the Lord. And I would admonish you to choose not to sin and quit playing around with that mess before you get burnt. Okay? So it's not that I'm better because, and I'm not going to jump back and be pious and say, there go I by the grace of God. True, but boy, sometimes that's a cover-up because you don't want to confront, in the conflict, you don't want to confront the sinful issue. So, okay. And you're right, there go I by the grace of God and so forth. Then there's conflicts not only due to differentness, but due to sinfulness and due to righteousness. Sometimes doing what's right causes a conflict. In the family, at work, out in your neighborhood, just because you're doing what's pleasing to God causes a conflict. You see, there's no way to address this in our society, our culture, our church, etc., without saying somewhere along the line others are going to be involved and others are going to either accept or reject or be in conflict, etc., etc. We won't come over there anymore. I mean, all you're going to talk about is the Lord, I don't want to visit with you, la 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 la. Well, okay. I mean, that's your choice, but it did cause a conflict there. So we want to be careful about putting everything in the same barrel. Now, I'll bring it to this point for this reason. If everything's not in the same barrel, then the solution can't be the same for everything. Okay? You don't deal with a non-sinful issue as if it's sinful. Okay? You deal with a sinful issue as if it is sinful. You deal with a righteous issue as if it's righteous. But you don't deal with, for instance, differentness, a non-sinful issue that's something you don't like or between me and you, etc., etc., as if it is sinful. You can't use Matthew 18 in a non-sinful scenario. Okay? You can't confront the brother. It's not a Galatians 6:1. It's a non-sinful issue. So you can't use that as if I'm in sin just because you don't like red shirts. Okay? Okay. So, well, I don't like red shirts. I don't think you ought to wear them. Well, we need to sit down and talk because for some reason you've got a standard that's different than what God's Word depicts. God never said not to wear a red shirt, ever. He never cursed anybody who did until you came along. See, we don't make non-sinful issues that are differences sinful issues.